Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. I do not agree with the decision. She's right. It's the wrong decision. She hasn't quite done her homework because the decision in question was taken under the last government according to the legal framework from the last government. But, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. It should be Parliament that makes the rules.
Mr. Speaker, he did not answer the question.
Keir Starmer is no stranger to political battles, but what happened in Westminster was unlike anything he had faced before. In just a few hours, his attempt to shift blame for a controversial immigration case backfired dramatically. Instead of quieting the criticism, he ended up receiving a sharp and public rebuke from the country's most senior judge, Baroness Suka. In Britain's unwritten political code, the judiciary speaks through rulings rather than press statements. For Baroness Suka to respond so openly showed she saw a serious breach not only of courtesy but also of constitutional principle. Starmer had accused the courts of making a decision that undermined immigration policy. By doing this, he crossed a line that even his predecessors, no matter how combative, had mostly avoided.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative government established the Ukraine Family Scheme, and in total, over 200,000 Ukrainians, mostly women, children and the elderly, have found sanctuary in the UK from Putin's war. However, a family of 6 from Gaza have applied to live in Britain using this scheme, and a judge has now ruled in their favour. This is not what the scheme was designed to do. This decision is completely wrong. It cannot be allowed to stand. Is the government planning to appeal on any points of law? And if so, which ones?
The clash centered on the separation of powers, the trust between government and judiciary, and whether the Prime Minister's political instincts now outweighed the legal principles he once supported. At the heart of the dispute was a Palestinian family of 6 from Gaza. Their home had been destroyed in the conflict, and relatives in the UK were ready to house and support them. The family applied through the Ukraine Family Scheme not because they were Ukrainian, but because the Home Office system had no other online option for their situation. After carefully reviewing the facts, a British judge ruled in their favour. The judgment was not a loophole or a creative interpretation of the law. It was based on existing human rights protections that Parliament had approved. The ruling also made it clear that this was an exceptional case, unlikely to create a precedent for mass migration,
where we allow enormous numbers of people to exploit our laws in this way. There are millions of people all around the world in terrible situations. We cannot help them all, and we certainly cannot bring them all here. Will he commit to bringing forward that new legislation or amending his borders bill?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I've already said the Home Secretary has already got her team working on closing this loophole. We don't need to wait for that. We're getting on with that because we're taking control. They lost control of immigration. We had nearly 1 million people come into this country, had an open borders experiment. On a Monday of this week, they voted against increased powers to deal with those that are running the vile trade of people smuggling. Same old Tories, open borders, empty promises.
But when the issue reached Parliament, that careful nuance was lost. Starmer presented it as a mistake, suggesting the scheme was being exploited and that judges were part of the problem. The story changed from a lawful ruling to a political flashpoint. This shift paved the way for the confrontation that followed. When questioned about the case in the Commons, Starmer didn't just disagree with the ruling, he called it wrong and said it needed to be reversed. He directly linked it to immigration policy, insisting that Parliament, not the courts, should decide who is allowed into the country.
Perhaps he'd be able to answer some questions. Given this crazy decision and so many others, new legislation is needed to clarify the right to a family life in Article 8. I'm not talking about what he just said. I know Labour MPs don't understand much of what they're saying, but the Prime Minister literally wrote a book on the European Convention on Human Rights. This is a situation where we need to put our national interest before the ECHR. Does he agree that we should legislate even if lawyers warn that this might be incompatible with human rights law?
She complains about scripted answers and questions. Her script doesn't allow her to listen to the answer.
Prime Minister.
She asked me if we're going to change the law and close the loophole in question 1. I said yes. She asked me again in question 2, and I said yes. She asked me again in question 3. It's still
This framing
yes.
carried two consequences.
This framing had two major consequences. First, it misrepresented the legal basis of the decision, which wasn't about bending the Ukraine scheme but was firmly rooted in human rights law. Second, it painted the judge as overstepping into political territory, a serious accusation in the UK's constitutional system. By making this accusation openly in Parliament, Starmer amplified and legitimized the criticism within the political arena. What had been a technical legal disagreement became a public challenge to the independence of the judiciary. That was the moment Baroness Suker decided that silence was no longer an option in the UK. Senior judges almost never respond directly to political criticism because their independence depends on staying above the political fray, allowing their rulings to speak for themselves. This is why Baroness Suker's response was so extraordinary. She issued a public statement, addressed the issue in her annual press conference, and wrote directly to both Starmer and the Lord Chancellor. Her message was clear. Political leaders have a duty to protect judicial independence, not undermine it. She warned that such rhetoric not only damages public trust in the courts but also fuels hostility toward judges who cannot defend themselves the way politicians can. For the country's top judge to break tradition signaled this was more than a policy dispute, it was a constitutional warning shot that placed the Prime Minister in the spotlight for the wrong reasons. Baroness Suker's warning wasn't just about legal principles. She also highlighted a growing security threat faced by judges nationwide. Political attacks, she argued, don't just stay in headlines, they can spark real-world anger. In recent months, judges have faced online harassment, had personal details shared on social media, and even suffered physical assaults in courtrooms, was attacked with a radiator during proceedings. In her view, rhetoric from senior politicians can inflame tensions, turning judges into symbols of public frustration rather than impartial arbiters of the law. To question 1.
I asked if he would appeal the decision. He did not answer that. He's not listening. He's too busy defending the international human rights law framework. Mr. Speaker, this case has arisen because a Palestinian came to the UK from Gaza in 2007. He is now a British citizen. This is precisely why we need to break the conveyor belt from arriving in the UK to acquiring indefinite leave to remain and then a British passport and now a right to bring 6 family members here as well. Just last week, the Prime Minister bizarrely claimed that a British passport was not a pull factor for those coming to the UK. Will he now support our plans to toughen the process on indefinite leave to remain and make getting a British passport a privilege, not a right?
Prime Minister.
Speaker, they presided over record high levels of immigration. It reached nearly 1 million. It was a one-nation experiment in open borders. And she was the cheerleader. She was the one campaigning for more people to come and thanking her own side when they supported her campaign. So before she lectures us, I think she needs to reflect on her own record here.
By framing the Gaza family ruling as a wrongful act that needed to be shut down, Starmer risked fueling hostility toward the judiciary. For judges, the concern wasn't about disagreement over immigration policy but about how such comments could erode public trust and make their work more dangerous. Starmer built his career defending the rule of law, as a human rights lawyer and later as director of public prosecutions. He strongly argued for judicial independence and criticized any attempts by politicians to undermine it. When in opposition, he condemned ministers who attacked court rulings, calling that behavior harmful to democracy. This background makes the current episode especially damaging. Now in power, Starmer has used the same tactics he once criticized, turning a lawful judgment into a political problem to be fixed. The Gaza family case gave him a chance to appear tough on immigration, but in doing so, he undermined the very system he once championed. For many, this raises a troubling question: were his past principles genuine, or were they just convenient positions? Either way, the shift is clear, and his opponents won't hesitate to use it against him. Starmer's handling of the Gaza family ruling was a calculated political move. Immigration remains a highly sensitive issue, and by criticizing the judgment, he presented himself as a leader ready to challenge any decision seen as weakening border controls. This was aimed at voters who believe the system is too easily exploited. But the gamble cuts both ways. While it might boost his image with some, it risks alienating those who value the separation of powers and expect a prime minister to respect judicial independence. It also gives his critics a clear attack line that the former defender of human rights has abandoned his principles for short-term political gain.
He is the Prime Minister now? The people out there want to know what he is going to do about the situation. He needs to spend less time whining about the last government and do his job. I thought, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister and I both agreed that Israel had a right to defend herself. Yet the judge in this case noted that the family were facing a humanitarian crisis, and I quote, as a consequence of the Israeli government's indiscriminate attempts to eliminate Hamas, and government lawyers accepted this. Is the Prime Minister allowing lawyers to change the position on Israel? And was this because of advice from the Attorney General? And if not, why on earth did government lawyers accept the argument that Israeli actions were indiscriminate?
Prime Minister.
They put the complete opposite argument. She talks about on top of her brief. She has no idea what she's talking about. I'll tell her again. We need to...
Here's a slightly polished version of your text, keeping it clear and engaging by framing the Gaza family ruling as a wrongful act that needed to be shut down. Starmer risked fueling hostility toward the judiciary. For judges, the real concern wasn't disagreement over immigration policy, but how such comments could erode public trust and make their work more dangerous. Starmer built his career defending the rule of law. As a human rights lawyer and later as director of public prosecutions, he strongly argued for judicial independence and criticized any attempts by politicians to undermine it. When he was in opposition, he condemned ministers who attacked court rulings, calling such behavior harmful to democracy. This background makes the current episode especially damaging. Now in power, Starmer has used the very tactics he once criticized, turning a lawful judgment into a political problem to be fixed. The Gaza family case gave him a chance to appear tough on immigration, but in doing so, he undermined the system he once championed. For many, this raises a troubling question. Were his past principles genuine, or were they simply convenient positions? Either way, the shift is clear, and his opponents won't hesitate to use it against him. Starmer's handling of the Gaza family ruling was a calculated political move. Immigration remains a highly sensitive issue, and by criticizing the judgment, he positioned himself as a leader ready to challenge any decision. Seen as weakening border controls, this was aimed at voters who believe the system is too easily exploited. But the gamble cuts both ways. While it might boost his image with some, it risks alienating those who value the separation of powers and expect a prime minister to respect judicial independence. It also hands his critics a clear attack line that the former defender of human rights has abandoned his principles for short-term political gain.